Officer Ryan Walker stormed across the park without warning, stopping in front of a middle-aged black man quietly reading beneath an oak tree. "Get up. I need to know why you're sitting here," he demanded. The man looked up calmly, closed his book, and replied, "Is reading in a public park a crime now, officer?" Ryan smirked. "Don't get smart with me." Parents pulled their children closer while joggers slowed to watch. Someone started recording. Ryan searched the man's backpack, dumped its contents onto the grass, then grabbed his wrist. "You're coming with me until I figure out who you really are." The stranger never resisted. He simply stood, brushed dirt from his jacket, and asked, "Have you finished your investigation, or have you only finished making assumptions?" Ryan's jaw tightened. He reached for his handcuffs just as the sound of engines echoed through the park. 3 black SUVs rolled to a stop. Doors swung open in perfect unison. Federal agents rushed forward with unmistakable purpose. The lead agent stopped before the quiet stranger, stood at full attention, and saluted. "Good morning, Director Marcus Ellington." Every conversation in the park died instantly. Ryan's face turned ghost white as the handcuffs slipped from his trembling fingers. Marcus met his eyes with complete composure and quietly said, "Officer, this conversation is only beginning. You know someone is already lost when they judge a stranger before asking a single honest question." The quiet words drifted across the park just seconds before Officer Ryan Walker's morning patrol turned into the moment that would haunt the rest of his career. Maplewood Park was already alive under the warm North Carolina sun. Children chased soccer balls across the fresh-cut grass. A retired couple shared coffee beside the duck pond. Runners circled the winding trail while birds settled onto the branches of towering oak trees. It looked like the kind of peaceful Saturday where nothing unusual could possibly happen. At the far end of the park, a middle-aged black man sat alone on an old wooden bench beneath the shade of a massive oak. He wore dark jeans, polished brown shoes, and a lightweight navy jacket despite the mild 72-degree weather. Resting across his lap was a thick hardcover book with dozens of colorful tabs sticking from its pages. Every few moments he quietly underlined a sentence with a fountain pen before looking toward the playground where children laughed without a care in the world. His name was Marcus Ellington, though no one around him recognized it. To everyone passing by, he appeared to be just another man enjoying a quiet morning in the park. Marcus acknowledged everyone with the same gentle smile. He nodded to an elderly veteran walking his golden retriever. He waved at a little girl learning to ride her bicycle. When a young boy accidentally kicked a soccer ball toward his bench, Marcus trapped it effortlessly with his foot before rolling it back with surprising precision. "Nice kick, buddy," he called with a warm laugh. The boy grinned before running back across the field. Watching from nearly 50 feet away, Officer Ryan Walker narrowed his eyes. Ryan had built a reputation inside the department for trusting his instincts more than facts. He believed confidence was the fastest way to establish authority, and he rarely questioned his first impression of anyone. As he adjusted the body camera clipped to his uniform, his attention remained fixed on Marcus, a man sitting alone, a backpack beside the bench, a notebook full of handwritten notes. None of it violated any law, yet something about the scene convinced Ryan that he needed to intervene. Without another thought, he changed direction and walked straight across the grass. Several nearby families noticed the officer approaching and instinctively slowed their conversations. A woman pushing a stroller paused near the walking path. 2 teenagers sitting on a picnic table quietly lowered the volume on their music. Even the breeze seemed to lose its voice as Ryan stopped directly in front of Marcus, blocking both the sunlight and the view of the pond. Marcus slowly looked up from his book, his expression calm and welcoming. "Good morning, officer," he said politely. Ryan didn't return the greeting. Instead, he folded his arms and stared down at the seated man. "Stand up," he ordered. "I need to know exactly what you're doing here." Marcus carefully closed the book, placing a bookmark between its pages before lifting his eyes once again. "Reading," he answered softly. "Is that no longer allowed in a public park?" Ryan's jaw tightened. Around them, more people began watching. None of them realized they were about to witness a single conversation that would expose far more than either man expected. Marcus remained seated for another second, not because he was refusing the order, but because he believed every conversation deserved a calm beginning. Then he stood slowly, slipping the bookmark into his hardcover before placing it neatly inside his weathered leather backpack. Every movement was deliberate, unhurried, almost practiced. It was the kind of composure that often unsettled people more than anger ever could. Officer Ryan Walker watched him carefully. The backpack, the notebook, the fountain pen, the expensive watch hidden beneath the jacket sleeve. Ryan noticed every detail but reached only one conclusion, and he reached it far too quickly. Identification, Ryan said, extending his hand. Marcus nodded politely and reached into his jacket pocket. Before he could remove his wallet, Ryan interrupted. Slowly, Marcus gave a slight smile, acknowledging the instruction without comment. Around them, the atmosphere had begun to change. The laughter from the nearby playground softened. A father tossing a baseball with his teenage son paused in mid-throw. A woman walking her Labrador slowed almost to a stop. Nobody knew exactly what was happening, but everyone sensed that something ordinary had quietly become extraordinary. Marcus handed over his driver's license without protest. Ryan studied it for only a brief moment before slipping it into his own hand instead of immediately returning it. Marcus Ellington, he read aloud. Local address. He looked back at Marcus. What brings you here every weekend? Marcus answered with the same calm tone. Fresh air. Quiet mornings. Good books. Sometimes those are enough. Ryan tilted his head, unimpressed. You expect me to believe you spend Saturday mornings reading legal books in a public park? Marcus glanced toward the hardcover resting inside the backpack. Knowledge travels well. Parks happen to be peaceful places to find it. Ryan let out a short laugh that carried farther than he intended. A few bystanders exchanged uncomfortable glances. The response sounded less like curiosity and more like disbelief. Mind opening the backpack? Ryan asked. Marcus nodded once. Not at all. He unzipped the bag and stepped back, allowing Ryan plenty of space. Inside sat only the thick book, a notebook filled with handwritten observations, a stainless steel water bottle, a neatly folded windbreaker, reading glasses, and a small paper bag containing a turkey sandwich and an apple. Ryan lifted the notebook first. Every page contained organized notes, quotations about leadership, constitutional law, ethics, and public trust. Several pages were filled with neatly written observations from previous weeks. One sentence caught Ryan's attention for only an instant before he turned the page. Respect earned through fear disappears the moment fear leaves the room. Ryan frowned, closed the notebook, and reached for the hardcover instead. It was heavily marked with colored tabs and handwritten notes in the margins. You a lawyer? Ryan asked. Marcus smiled gently. No. Professor. No. Then why spend your weekends reading books like this? Marcus looked toward the pond where a pair of ducks drifted quietly across the water. Because every important decision begins long before the decision itself. Preparation is a habit, not an event. Ryan folded his arms. The answer irritated him for reasons he could not explain. It sounded too thoughtful, too confident, almost as though Marcus believed he had nothing to prove. A teenager standing nearby quietly whispered, "The guy has not done anything wrong." His friend nodded while continuing to record from several yards away. Ryan noticed the phones now pointed in his direction. Rather than easing the situation, the growing audience strengthened his determination to remain in control. He stepped closer to Marcus, lowering his voice just enough to sound personal, but loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. People who have nothing to hide usually answer questions a lot faster. Marcus met the officer's eyes without hesitation. Sometimes the fastest answers are not the most truthful ones, officer. I have learned that patience often reveals far more than assumptions ever will. For the first time that morning, Ryan felt as though he was no longer questioning Marcus. Somehow, without raising his voice or changing his expression, Marcus had quietly begun examining him instead. Ryan did not realize it yet, but the conversation had quietly shifted beyond a routine stop. It was no longer about a man sitting on a park bench. It had become a test of judgment, one that every pair of watching eyes seemed to understand except his own. He slipped Marcus's driver's license into his shirt pocket instead of handing it back. You are going to stay right here until I finish figuring this out, he said firmly. Marcus simply nodded. I have nowhere else I need to be for the next few minutes. The answer sounded so sincere that it only frustrated Ryan more. Most people became nervous when an officer questioned them. Some argued. Others apologized. Marcus didn't either. He remained calm, standing with relaxed shoulders and steady eyes, as though time itself had slowed around him. A little boy from the playground wandered closer, holding a red soccer ball against his chest. It was the same child Marcus had smiled at earlier. "Mister," the boy asked innocently, "are you in trouble?" Marcus smiled warmly. "No, buddy. Sometimes grown-ups just need to finish a conversation." The child nodded as though that made perfect sense before his mother gently guided him back toward the playground. Ryan watched the exchange with folded arms. "You seem pretty comfortable for someone being investigated," Marcus answered without hesitation. Being respectful and being afraid are not the same thing. Those words lingered in the air longer than anyone expected. Several people exchanged quiet glances. A man walking his bicycle stopped beside the trail. An elderly woman lowered the newspaper she had been reading. More phones appeared, though nobody said a word. The silence itself had become heavier than any argument. Ryan reached for his radio. "Dispatch. Run another records check on Marcus Ellington. Full identification. I want everything." The radio crackled before a dispatcher acknowledged the request. While waiting, Ryan continued studying Marcus. "What exactly do you do for a living?" Marcus looked toward the trees where sunlight filtered through the leaves in scattered patches across the grass. "Public service," he replied. Ryan raised one eyebrow. "That is a pretty broad answer. It is also an honest one." Ryan shook his head. "People usually tell me their job title." Marcus gave a faint smile. "Job titles matter less than how people treat one another." Ryan exhaled sharply, clearly losing patience. "You always answer questions with another lesson?" Marcus considered that for a moment. "Only when the lesson seems more useful than the answer." A few people nearby quietly smiled. Ryan noticed their reactions immediately. It felt as though the crowd had begun siding with Marcus without anyone openly saying so. That realization tightened something inside him. He could feel authority slipping away, not because anyone challenged it, but because respect could not be demanded as easily as compliance. Suddenly his radio came alive again. "Unit 12, dispatch requesting confirmation. Please verify the spelling on the last name." Ryan looked down at the identification card once more. "Ellington. Echo Lima Lima India November Golf Tango Oscar November." There was an unusual pause on the other end. Longer than normal. Almost hesitant. Ryan frowned. "Dispatch." Another pause followed. Then the dispatcher responded with unexpected caution. "Unit 12, please remain where you are. A supervisor is attempting to contact you directly." Ryan stared at the radio. "For what?" No answer came. Only silence filled the speaker before the transmission ended. Around the park, nothing moved except the gentle breeze across the pond. Marcus quietly reached into his backpack and removed his reading glasses, carefully folding them into their case as though he already understood something no one else had yet discovered. Ryan looked from the radio back to Marcus, suddenly aware that the morning was no longer unfolding according to his expectations, and somewhere beyond the quiet streets surrounding Maplewood Park, events had already begun moving toward them. The quiet pause after the radio transmission felt heavier than any spoken accusation. Officer Ryan Walker glanced at the display, waiting for another message, but none came. Around him, Maplewood Park continued moving at its usual pace, yet something invisible had changed. Parents were no longer chatting. Joggers had stopped pretending not to watch. Even the ducks drifting across the pond seemed to glide through a silence that had settled over the entire scene. Ryan slipped the radio back onto his shoulder and squared his posture. Whatever dispatch was doing, he refused to let uncertainty show on his face. "Until my supervisor arrives, you are staying exactly where you are," he said firmly. Marcus Ellington gave a respectful nod. "I have cooperated from the beginning, officer. That will not change." Ryan studied him again, searching for the slightest hint of nervousness. There was none. Marcus stood with relaxed shoulders, his hands resting comfortably in front of him, his expression calm enough to belong in a library instead of the center of an unexpected public confrontation. It bothered Ryan more than he wanted to admit. Most people reacted emotionally when questioned in front of strangers. Marcus behaved as though the opinion of the crowd carried no weight at all. A gentle breeze stirred the pages of the hardcover book still resting inside the open backpack. One loose page fluttered free and landed on the grass near Ryan's boots. He picked it up automatically. It was not a legal document or anything suspicious. It contained neatly handwritten notes beneath a simple heading. Leadership begins with listening. Ryan's eyes drifted across several lines before he could stop himself. Never confuse authority with respect. Respect is earned one decision at a time. Judge behavior before appearance. Ask questions before reaching conclusions. Ryan quietly folded the page and looked back at Marcus. You write these? Marcus nodded. Mostly reminders for myself. You carry leadership notes to a public park? Ryan asked. Marcus smiled faintly. Some people exercise their bodies every morning. I try to exercise my judgment. Before Ryan could answer, an older man wearing a baseball cap stepped forward from the gathering crowd. Officer, he said politely, I have been sitting over there fishing since 7 this morning. That gentleman has done nothing except read, smile at children, and enjoy the weather. Ryan acknowledged him with a brief glance. Sir, I appreciate your input, but I will handle this. The man nodded respectfully and stepped back without another word. Marcus never looked toward the crowd. He kept his attention on Ryan alone, almost as if he believed the only conversation that mattered was the one happening between the two of them. Then another sound broke the stillness. Not sirens. Engines. Low, controlled, expensive engines approaching from somewhere beyond the park entrance. Ryan instinctively turned his head toward the road. The sound grew closer before disappearing again behind rows of tall maple trees. He frowned. It was unusual, but not enough to draw conclusions. Marcus noticed the distant engines as well, yet his expression remained unchanged. Instead, he quietly asked, Officer Walker, may I ask you one question? Ryan hesitated before answering. Go ahead. Marcus spoke with the same measured voice that had never once risen above conversation. When you first walked toward me this morning, what was the very first thing you believed about me? Ryan opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. For the first time all morning, he realized he could not point to a single action Marcus had taken before he decided there was something wrong. The realization lingered only a second before several dark vehicles slowly appeared beyond the park entrance, moving with calm precision toward the center of the grounds, and every eye nearby instinctively turned in the same direction. The 3 black sport utility vehicles rolled through the park entrance without flashing lights or loud sirens. They moved slowly across the paved road, their glossy paint reflecting the morning sun as every conversation around the pond faded into complete silence. Parents instinctively stepped aside with their children. Joggers removed their earbuds. Even the teenagers who had been quietly recording lowered their phones for a moment, sensing that something far more significant than an ordinary police encounter was unfolding. Officer Ryan Walker kept his eyes fixed on the approaching vehicles, convincing himself they were unrelated. Maplewood Park often hosted community events. Government officials visited from time to time. There had to be another explanation. Still, a strange feeling settled in his stomach as the convoy came to a smooth stop less than 50 feet away. The doors remained closed for several seconds. No one stepped out. The silence stretched longer than seemed natural. Ryan glanced back toward Marcus Ellington, expecting to see curiosity or concern. Instead, Marcus stood exactly where he had been all morning, calm, composed, almost as though he had expected the arrival without ever looking toward the entrance. Ryan noticed something else. Marcus had quietly buttoned his navy jacket and straightened the cuffs of his shirt with small, practiced movements. There was no nervousness in those gestures. They reflected habit, discipline, and preparation. Ryan folded his arms. Do you know who those people are? Marcus answered honestly. I believe I do. Were you expecting them? Ryan asked. Marcus paused before replying. I knew someone would eventually need to clear up the misunderstanding. That answer landed heavily. Ryan felt a flicker of irritation. You could have avoided all of this if you had simply explained yourself from the beginning. Marcus met his eyes with quiet sincerity. Officer, you never asked me who I was. You only asked me to justify why I was here. The words settled over the crowd like a cool breeze. Several people exchanged thoughtful glances. An elderly woman standing near the walking trail slowly nodded to herself. The fisherman who had spoken earlier lowered his cap and quietly looked toward the convoy. Then the first vehicle door opened. A man in a dark suit stepped out, followed by another, then another. Each carried themselves with calm confidence rather than urgency. Their posture was unmistakable, professional, disciplined, purposeful. They did not scatter through the park or rush toward anyone. Instead, They walked together in a straight line with measured steps. Ryan instinctively reached for the radio clipped to his shoulder. Before he could press the transmit button, it came alive on its own. Unit 12, the dispatcher's voice said carefully. Your supervising sergeant has been trying to reach you. He is requesting that you remain exactly where you are and avoid taking any further action until he arrives. Ryan frowned. Dispatch, who are these people? Another brief silence followed. When the dispatcher finally spoke again, the voice sounded unusually restrained. Unit 12, your supervisor will explain in person. The transmission ended. Ryan stared at the radio, then looked back toward the approaching group. They were close enough now for him to notice matching lapel pins, polished credentials hanging discreetly beneath tailored jackets, and expressions that revealed neither anger nor excitement. They simply looked focused. Marcus quietly picked up his leather backpack, slipped the folded leadership notes back inside, and closed the zipper with careful precision. He took one slow breath as sunlight filtered through the oak branches above him. Then, for the first time that morning, one of the suited officials lifted his eyes, spotted Marcus across the grass, and immediately changed direction with unmistakable purpose, while every person in the park sensed they were about to witness the truth that had been hidden in plain sight. The suited officials continued across the grass with measured steps, their polished shoes barely making a sound against the morning dew. No one spoke. The only noise came from the distant laughter of children who had not yet noticed that the adults around them had fallen completely silent. Officer Ryan Walker stood motionless, his attention fixed on the approaching group. Every instinct told him something significant was unfolding, yet his pride refused to accept that the quiet man standing only a few feet away could somehow be connected to it. The lead official, a silver-haired man with an earpiece and a navy suit tailored to perfection, slowed as he approached Marcus Ellington. Without hesitation, he stopped, straightened his posture, and offered a respectful nod. "Good morning, sir," he said in a calm, professional voice. Marcus returned the greeting with the same quiet warmth he had shown everyone else that morning. "Good morning, David. I hope I did not interrupt your schedule." David allowed himself the slightest smile. "Not at all, sir. We adjusted ours." Ryan felt a chill run through him. There was no confusion in the exchange. No surprise. These people clearly knew Marcus, and they addressed him with a level of respect Ryan had rarely witnessed. Before he could speak, another black sedan entered the park entrance at a slightly faster pace. A marked police vehicle followed close behind. Sergeant Daniel Cooper stepped out almost before the cruiser came to a complete stop. His expression was unusually serious. He walked briskly toward Ryan, but slowed noticeably as soon as he recognized Marcus. The color in his face changed. For a brief moment, Daniel looked less like a commanding police supervisor and more like someone who had unexpectedly walked into an important meeting without an invitation. "Officer Walker," Daniel said quietly, "step over here for a moment." Ryan looked confused. "Sergeant, I have everything under control." Daniel's eyes never left Marcus. "No, Ryan, you do not." Ryan frowned. "Sir, I was conducting a lawful investigation." Daniel took a slow breath before answering. "Did this gentleman threaten anyone?" "No." "Did he refuse to identify himself?" "No." "Did he interfere with your duties?" Ryan hesitated. "No." Daniel closed his eyes for the briefest moment, disappointment crossing his face. Around them, every bystander remained silent. Even the breeze seemed to pause beneath the broad oak branches. Marcus watched the exchange without interruption, neither defending himself nor criticizing Ryan. His composure somehow made the moment even heavier. David stepped closer to Marcus and quietly handed him a slim leather portfolio. Marcus accepted it with a simple thank you before slipping it beneath his arm. The movement was so ordinary that it almost concealed the significance of the gesture. Daniel noticed it immediately. His shoulders became noticeably straighter. Ryan looked from the portfolio to the convoy and back again. "Sergeant," he asked carefully, "who exactly is this man?" Daniel did not answer right away. Instead, he removed his cap, a gesture none of the watching civilians had expected. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. "Ryan, before I answer that question, I need you to think very carefully about every assumption you made during the last 20 minutes." Ryan swallowed hard. The confidence that had carried him through the morning was quietly slipping away. He looked at Marcus again, replaying every word, every calm response, Every opportunity he had ignored to simply ask instead of assume. Then David took one respectful step backward and addressed Marcus clearly enough for everyone standing nearby to hear. And in that single moment, the truth that had remained hidden all morning was finally about to be spoken aloud. David stood at attention beneath the sprawling oak tree, his polished shoes perfectly still on the morning grass. Every person in the park seemed to hold the same breath. Then, in a voice clear enough to carry across the quiet pond, he spoke. "Good morning, Director Marcus Ellington. Headquarters is ready whenever you are, sir." Time seemed to stop. The words echoed through the silence like the toll of a distant bell. Officer Ryan Walker stared at Marcus, waiting for someone to laugh, to correct the statement, to explain that there had been some impossible misunderstanding. No one did. Marcus simply offered a courteous nod. "Thank you, David. We will leave shortly." David handed Marcus a small leather credential wallet. Marcus opened it briefly before closing it again. Ryan caught only a glimpse of the unmistakable gold seal inside before Marcus slipped it back into his jacket. Sergeant Daniel Cooper immediately straightened his posture and addressed Marcus with quiet respect. "Director Ellington, I sincerely apologize for what occurred this morning." Marcus answered gently. "Thank you, Sergeant. I appreciate your professionalism." Ryan felt every confident assumption he had made collapse in complete silence. His mind raced backward through the morning. The polite greeting, the calm answers, the willingness to cooperate, the leadership notes inside the backpack. The simple question Marcus had asked him, "What was the very first thing you believed about me?" Ryan finally understood why he had been unable to answer. He had reached a conclusion long before he had gathered a single fact. Around them, whispers spread softly through the crowd. The elderly fisherman slowly removed his cap. The mother with the stroller lowered her phone. Even the teenagers who had been recording no longer smiled. The story unfolding before them was no longer entertaining. It had become uncomfortably real. Ryan swallowed hard before stepping forward. His voice sounded smaller than it had all morning. "Director Ellington, I did not know who you were." Marcus looked directly into his eyes, his expression unchanged. "I know," Ryan quickly added. "If I had known." Marcus gently raised one hand, stopping him before he could finish. "Officer Walker, that is exactly the problem." Ryan fell silent. Marcus continued, speaking with neither anger nor accusation. "Respect that depends upon a title is not respect. Courtesy that depends upon a badge is not professionalism. The people you meet every day deserve fairness before you discover who they are." No one interrupted. Every sentence settled into the quiet morning with remarkable clarity. Marcus glanced toward the playground where the little boy with the red soccer ball was watching from behind his mother. "This young man asked whether I was in trouble," Marcus said softly. "Children often ask the simplest questions. Adults sometimes create the most complicated answers." Ryan lowered his eyes. He suddenly remembered every opportunity he had ignored to simply listen. Daniel Cooper remained completely still beside him. David and the other officials said nothing, allowing Marcus's words to become the only authority anyone heard. After several long seconds, Ryan quietly removed Marcus's driver's license from his shirt pocket and returned it with both hands. "I am sorry, sir," he said sincerely. Marcus accepted it with a grateful nod, but did not immediately place it back into his wallet. Instead, he looked at the small plastic card for a moment before slipping it away. "Officer," he said calmly, "today was never about my identification. It was about yours. Every decision you make tells people who you are long before you introduce yourself." Ryan stood speechless beneath the morning sunlight, realizing that the most important lesson of his career had not come from a classroom, a training manual, or a superior officer, but from the quiet stranger he had mistaken for someone who needed to prove his worth. The words lingered in the cool morning air long after Marcus Ellington stopped speaking. No one hurried to fill the silence. The breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass across the pond as sunlight shimmered on the gentle ripples. For the first time since Officer Ryan Walker had approached the bench, there was no tension in the park, only reflection. Ryan stood motionless, his shoulders no longer squared with confidence, but lowered beneath the weight of a lesson he knew he would never forget. He looked at the badge pinned to his uniform, then quietly unclipped it for a moment, holding it in the palm of his hand. It suddenly felt heavier than it ever had before. "Director Ellington," he said softly, I cannot change how I began this morning, but I hope I can change how I serve tomorrow. Marcus studied the young officer for several seconds. There was no bitterness in his expression, only careful consideration. Then he smiled, not because the mistake had been small, but because the willingness to learn was real. Officer Walker, he replied, every professional will eventually make a poor decision. What separates good leaders from everyone else is what they choose to do after they recognize it. Ryan nodded quietly. I understand. Marcus gently shook his head. Not yet. Understanding begins today. Living differently begins tomorrow. Those nearby listened without speaking. Even the teenagers who had recorded nearly the entire encounter slowly lowered their phones. One of them looked at the screen, hesitated, and quietly deleted the video without saying a word. His friend glanced over with surprise. Why did you erase it? The teenager shrugged. Because this does not need another person being embarrassed. It needs another person learning. Marcus noticed the exchange and offered the young man a grateful nod. Sergeant Daniel Cooper stepped forward. Director Ellington, if there is anything our department can do to make this right, please tell us. Marcus looked around the park, taking in the families, the fishermen, the children laughing once again near the playground. There is, he answered. Continue building a department where every conversation begins with dignity instead of suspicion. That is how trust grows. Daniel nodded with complete sincerity. We will. David checked his watch, but made no effort to interrupt. The schedule waiting for Marcus could wait another minute. Some conversations were simply more important than meetings. The little boy with the red soccer ball suddenly walked toward Marcus again, this time with his mother beside him. Mister, the child asked with innocent curiosity, are you still reading your book today? Marcus smiled warmly. Absolutely. He reached into his backpack, removed the hardcover, and held it up. The best chapters are usually the ones after you think the story is over. The boy grinned. Can I read books like that when I grow up? You can, Marcus answered. And I hope you also learn to read people with the same patience. The child's mother thanked Marcus quietly before leading her son back toward the playground. Ryan watched them leave, realizing that children had witnessed everything that morning. They had watched not only how authority was exercised, but also how grace looked when someone had every reason to humiliate another person and simply chose not to. Marcus turned back toward Ryan one final time. Officer, remember one thing whenever you put on that uniform. Ryan lifted his eyes. Marcus spoke with calm conviction. The badge introduces your profession. Your character introduces you. Ryan gave a respectful nod, and this time it came not from obligation or rank, but from genuine admiration. Around them, the park slowly returned to its peaceful rhythm. Yet everyone who had witnessed the encounter understood they were leaving with something far more valuable than a story. They were leaving with a standard by which they would forever measure the meaning of real authority. Marcus Ellington slipped the hardcover book back into his leather backpack and slowly looked around Maplewood Park one last time. The morning had come full circle. Children were laughing again near the playground. The elderly fisherman had returned to the edge of the pond, his line disappearing quietly into the still water. Runners resumed their pace beneath the towering oak trees, and conversations gradually replaced the silence that had held the park only minutes before. Life had returned to normal, yet everyone who had witnessed the encounter knew that something inside them had quietly changed. David opened the rear door of the waiting sport utility vehicle, but Marcus did not step inside immediately. Instead, he turned back toward Officer Ryan Walker, who remained standing exactly where they had left him. Ryan no longer looked like the confident patrol officer who had approached a stranger with certainty. He looked like a man carefully rebuilding the foundation beneath his own character. Marcus walked back the few steps separating them and extended his hand. Ryan looked surprised for only a moment before accepting the handshake with both hands. His grip was steady, but his eyes revealed genuine humility. Thank you, Ryan said quietly. Most people would have chosen to embarrass me today. Marcus smiled gently. Embarrassment rarely changes people. Reflection often does. Ryan nodded, absorbing every word. Marcus continued. You will wear that badge thousands of times during your career. Every morning it will ask you the same question. Will you see a person first or a stereotype first? Your answer will define every shift you ever work. Ryan lowered his eyes before answering. I promise I will remember. Marcus gave a small nod. Then today was not wasted. Sergeant Daniel Cooper stepped beside Ryan and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. There was no lecture, no public criticism, only quiet accountability. Daniel understood that the most lasting lessons were rarely the loudest ones. As Marcus finally entered the waiting vehicle, the little boy with the red soccer ball suddenly ran a few steps toward the road and waved enthusiastically. "Bye, Mr. Marcus." Marcus lowered the window and waved back with the same warm smile he had worn from the beginning of the morning. "Keep asking good questions," he called. "They will take you farther than quick answers." The boy smiled as though he had just received the greatest advice in the world. The convoy slowly pulled away beneath the canopy of green trees, disappearing beyond the park entrance without flashing lights or unnecessary attention. Within moments, the only evidence that anything extraordinary had happened was the quiet memory carried by those who had seen it. Ryan remained standing beside the empty wooden bench. His eyes drifted downward until they noticed a small folded note tucked beneath one corner of the bench where Marcus had been sitting. Carefully, he unfolded it. Only one sentence appeared in Marcus's unmistakably neat handwriting. "True authority is never measured by the power to command, but by the wisdom to treat every stranger with equal dignity." Ryan read the sentence once. Then again, he folded the note with care and placed it inside the same pocket where he carried his badge. Around him, sunlight filtered through the oak leaves, casting gentle patterns across the grass as a soft breeze turned the pages of the book he had begun reading before the interruption. Somewhere in the distance, church bells marked the passing hour, and Ryan finally understood that the most important investigation of that morning had never been about the man on the park bench. It had been about the man wearing the uniform,